Okay, hello, my friends. Here are five big stories, and I'm going to start with this overview from Anton Gerashchenko. He talks about a number of these pieces along the way, but he gives this great overview of where we are right now. He says this, where we are now and what we can expect in the coming months within the context of Russia's war in Ukraine. First, Ukraine and the world continue to await tensely for the results of the US elections. I think everybody's on edge there. Russia's primary focus is on discrediting Ukraine in the West, dividing our allies, and interfering in the US elections to divide Americans and increase instability. During his visit to the US, President Zelensky met with President Biden and had meetings with presidential candidates Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Ukraine continues to, and we'll talk about both of those last stories in just a moment. Ukraine continues to destroy Russian military depots and military logistics. Ukraine produces its own drones and other weapons. They're doing that increasingly, and 125 drones, maybe drone debris, were destroying Russian and Iranian missiles last night. Russia increases its weapons and drones production as much as it can despite sanctions. It uses weapons supplied by Russian allies, Iran and North Korea, and Chinese parts. Russia is intensifying its strikes on Ukrainian cities, deliberately targeting apartment blocks, hospitals, nursing homes. Its main purpose is to cause as much panic as possible. I think that's fair. Despite the lack of cannon fodder, Putin doesn't dare yet to announce open mobilization in Russia and increases hidden mobilization instead, like taking those conscripts that they got back, making them sign contracts so they're no longer conscripts, they are now contract soldiers. I talked about this yesterday or the day before. Increasing payments for signing army contracts and recruit soldiers from other countries. They're doing everything they can to keep this quiet and not upset the population. In the coming month, Russia will probably try to solve the Kursk issue at any cost. I would imagine this will ramp up significantly before Christmas. One of the key elements of these upcoming months are the elections in Moldova and Georgia at the end of October, where the influence of Russia and pro-Russian forces is enormous. So keep an eye on that. We are likely to hear increased nuclear threats. Yep, we're already hearing that. Ukraine will face, and we'll talk about that as one of the five big things today. Ukraine will face further problems due to the electricity shortage, and getting around that is going to be very tough. Due to the escalation in the Middle East and US elections, Ukraine is fading from the information field, which Russia is actively using, knowing that its crimes against Ukrainian civilians will not make the headlines in Western media. Accordingly, many people outside Ukraine have the impression that the situation is getting better, but this is not the case. There's really only some papers, Twitter, and about 3 dozen YouTubers that are actively trying to provide information here. Outside that, you just don't see it on mainstream media very much at all. The whole world is waiting for US elections, and he says, I'd like to end with a reminder of these Putin's words, in which he said in June 2024, nothing has changed for him. He intends to wage war until the end. Gerashchenko concludes, and it must become his own end. Okay, so that's a great overview of what's going on writ large. Now let's look at a number of these stories that were highlighted as Gerashchenko talked about everything that's coming down the line. According to the recent U.S. indictment, directives from Putin's own office, the number one priority for Russia's influence operations in America is to create nuclear hysteria and instill the fear that Russians will use nukes. And they're doing that and doing that and doing that. And yeah, and if you hear people talking about that, whether they are thinking it themselves or whether they got it from some troll or some comment or whatever, whether they got it from social media, doesn't matter. They're still propagating that message. Even if it came out of their own head, they're still helping that narrative. The recent U.S. Department of Justice indictments of several involved running the massive Russian influence operation listed Russians' number one goal was to create this nuclear psychosis, the fear Russia would use nuclear weapons. We see that it worked. And here's the actual article from the Washington Times. The Washington Times is a very conservative newspaper, and it was talking about just one thing I want to highlight here. Beyond the nuclear side, for example, 16% of GOP primary voters believe that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky bought 2 yachts for $75 million. I took time to debunk that, and it was very easy to debunk. We did it on this channel, but I'm only so big. I appreciate the likes. They help my videos spread, but it's, the message is only getting out so far. And other YouTubers like me were doing the same thing. Now, that number jumps to 39% among Joe Rogan viewers and 32% among Candace Owens viewers. And Owens is kind of on the right. I'm not exactly sure how to classify Joe Rogan. He's somewhat of a gadfly, but for if they're watching these other places, again, you have to check your facts. You have to be credible. Okay. Next big story. Zelensky claims Trump promised support for Ukraine in this private meeting. So he came out and had this private meeting. What exactly he promised, we don't exactly know. Following a meeting at Trump Tower, President Zelensky claims to have received direct information about potential support from Donald Trump if elected. A little bit more from the Kyiv Post. Zelensky says, quote, "I don't know what will happen after the election and who will be the president, but I received very direct information from Donald Trump that he will be on our side, that he will support Ukraine," unquote. Okay, so there's something there. I don't know that that's... it seems a lot riskier to bet on Trump as opposed to Harris as far as support for Ukraine based on Harris's statements and Trump's statements, but that's a positive sign in case that happens. Okay. The body of Seyyed Hassan Nasrallah has been recovered along with 20 other leaders that were with him. We talked about him yesterday and the day before. Pretty much all of Hezbollah's top leadership for like the first 3-4 tiers down has been decapitated, eliminated in the last 3 or 4 weeks. Now, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden came out with a statement. Kamala Harris's statement: Hassan Nasrallah was a terrorist with American blood on his hands. Today, Hezbollah victims have a measure of justice. And for equal time, Mitt Romney, the former presidential candidate, the one before Trump, when Republicans were still conservative and not populist, said the leader of the free world must stand unequivocally with free nations defending themselves. Ukraine against Russian invaders. Israel against Iran's Hezbollah and Hamas. Soleimani and Nasrallah deserve their demise. Putin deserves our repudiation. Right. This is how conservatives used to think. Anyway. Okay. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, however, has a very different message. They have strongly condemned the killing of Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, by Israel. The ministry referred to the strike on Nasrallah's bunker as a political assassination. Well, you are trying to decapitate the head of the T organization, so they're going after all of them. But that they're opposed to this is really telling of what Russia thinks of Hezbollah, Iran, etc. Okay, next topic. Biden reneges on his Ukraine promise, according to the Wall Street Journal. This was in the Wall Street Journal just 2 days ago. And here's a summary of the points. President Biden called himself a strong supporter of Ukrainian freedom in a speech at the United Nations this week, and the press agrees. But the less admirable side of the president's Ukraine legacy is that the administration refuses to talk to Congress and the American public about its strategy for winning the war. As part of the Ukraine supplemental funding bill this year, Congress required the Biden administration to submit a U.S. aid strategy within 45 days. The administration has been notorious for delaying the delivery of specific weapons. For example, the long-range weapons that could strike, or tanks or artillery early on, or those kinds of things. Biden's team hides behind platitudes like supporting Ukraine, quote, for as long as it takes, unquote, which is not a strategy. So what happened to the strategy that Congress demanded? Because that was required by the bill. Biden knew that commitment was needed to get the aid through Congress, and he signed the bill. But the administration submitted the document, quote, months after the congressionally mandated deadline, unquote, a group of House Republicans said in a statement this week. Moreover, this is typical of Biden's stubbornness. The document is completely classified. Republican lawmakers are calling on the administration to release an unclassified version as required by Congress so the public can review the document and debate its merits. Now, I know that the popular perception is Republicans are against Ukraine, Democrats are for it. It's not quite that simple. MAGA Republicans tend to be against Ukraine, the Marjorie Taylor Greene and her ilk, right? But the conservative, truly conservative, not populist, but conservative heads of the committees in the House and the Republicans in the Senate tend to be much more in favor of Ukraine, and that kind of crowd can go easily along with Democrats in supporting Ukraine. Mike Johnson is not easily going along, and Trump certainly is not either. Okay. Lavrov, next big story. Lavrov reported that the first meeting of the, quote, Friends of Peace, unquote, organized by China and Brazil was attended by France and Switzerland. This annoyed him. Okay, so he had this peace meeting, and it was, Brazil and China, and they were kind of going to shape it a certain way. Well, turns out France and Switzerland showed up with a delegation. This is Lavrov. Quote, I do not understand only one thing, how the French and Swiss appeared at the meeting. The Swiss cannot be called neutral for a long time. The French are NATO members. They support Ukraine, demand victory over Russia, and supplied long-range weapons. I asked my Chinese colleague. He said that they asked very much and were invited as observers. So he didn't actually want them there, although the meeting was called the Friends of Peace. Quote, we are ready to help them with advice. The main thing is that they should base their proposals on realities, not abstract talks, according to Lavrov. And so, yeah, they want them to base it on the Russian perception of the realities on the ground where they get to keep the land that they have stolen from Ukraine. Okay, finally, this last story, I think it's bizarre. And Republicans, please, you're making us look so terrible here. Roseanne Barr is meeting with Tucker Carlson. Roseanne Barr is saying they eat babies. It's true. And talking about the Haitians that Trump was talking about, Tucker Carlson asks incredulously, so it's not just the dogs and cats? Roseanne Barr, everybody thinks I'm crazy. I'm not crazy. They love the taste of human flesh and they drink human blood. Tucker, I think you have some authority on this. How on earth does Roseanne Barr have authority on this? And when did she become conservative exactly? I remember, I'm old enough to remember when we despised Roseanne Barr for mocking the national anthem back, 20 years ago, something like that. What happened? And why is she saying this? If you're going to say something, cite your sources. That's why I highlight all these documents as I go through, because I'm trying to be as credible as possible. But people will just say stuff to say stuff, and it's so sad and disheartening. Okay, this vase has had enough of your nonsense. When you see it, you'll see it. Thank you, my friends. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.